Quick question for you. Is fear a factor for you? I mean, does fear tend to sometimes dictate your actions, your feelings? Does it tend to hold you back from things that you actually want to do or things you actually want to get done? Well, I'm going to talk about all that, and we're going to talk about fear specifically, about things that might be hidden in your past. And we're going to define it. We're going to talk about really debating it, and then actually what you can do to get over it. So, focus in, and let's get into it. Jumbo, my friend. It's the coach so you know, and today we are going to talk about your deepest and darkest fears. Well, not specifically that, but we're going to talk about fear in general and how it can actually get in the way of some of your habits. And what I want to actually focus on is really, first off, I want to kind of define what fear is. And yes, there's the only thing you have to fear is fear itself. And that, like, actually fearing something is basically a fear, but that's a lot of mumbo jumbo that I don't want to get into or even talk about or define that way. I actually want to talk about fear in its actual definition is actually a form of anxiety. And when we have these fears, it's good to note that it's basically this uneasiness that comes around from certain feelings that we get, and it tends to give us this anxiety, and we tend to get this flight or fight response, but in this case, it's usually the flight response. And fear is really just a feeling, right? It's this anxious feeling that you get when you think about this certain thing that's happened in your past or this thing that might happen in your future, however you think about fears. And this basically anxious behavior, you have to remember that it is just a feeling. It's not your full-on thoughts. Fear is more of a feeling than it is a thought. And that's important to know because thoughts actually control your feelings. But for some people, that's not the case because think of somebody in your life who, whether you've known in the past or not, who tends to be like really angry, and they tend to all just kind of get like pissed off at different things, and they tend to want to fight people a lot and get in yelling matches with people. That's because for those people, their feelings are basically taking full control of their thoughts and their actions versus realizing that something is actually a thought, and then based off that thought, that's where you tend to get those feelings versus the other way around. But in the case of fear, because we're not talking about it that way, for fear and these other feelings, it's okay to have feelings. It's totally fine, but just remember that when we're talking about fear, it has to come from your thoughts first, or your mindset. Then it gets into the actual feeling of fear, and then the physical action of acting on that behavior of fear. But I want to kind of debate it for a sec in the second part. So, thinking about your fear that you might have, why do you have it? You know, I would probably guess that you're probably biased about your fear, right? See, when I was growing up, my dad used to do this thing where he would go into the back hallway of our house, and he would just make these like growling noises, you know. And this, don't get me wrong, this wasn't like a week ago that this happened. He's not doing it like today, I don't think. Hopefully not. But he made these growling noises, and it was just because he was trying to play around when we were just toddlers. And he'd make these noises in the back, and I still had a fear of the dark back then. And because of him being back there and having these things happen, or going camping and hearing a bunch of strange noises in the woods, it's that kind of fear of the unknown that pretty much gave me the background for that fear originally. But what is it for you? You really have to think. You're probably biased by it because whether it's Common ones are like fear of heights, fear of spiders, fear of dogs because one happened to nip you in the past or bite you. Not the fear of like some of those other things, but the dog one specifically. Spiders, you might have had some weird scary occurrence with a spider, things like this where it's really just kind of your own sort of biased view on it. It's not that all these things, all dogs, all spiders are actually dangerous by nature. It's just the one experience of these things that you've had in the past. But I want you to think about the side effects. Are having these fears, what would actually be the outcome if those things were to happen? Yes, you would freak out. Yes, you might get your heart racing and start breathing heavy at that point in time. But all in all, you'd probably be okay if you really think about your fear. Now, yes, we could debate that if you have a fear of heights and you just happen to fall off a cliff, yeah, that wouldn't go so well. And I'm not saying anything of that nature. I'm just saying if it comes to these small fears where it's just something in your mindset and you think about these situations, the majority of the time you're going to be fine. And that's something to really kind of focus in on. So if you think about this bit of being fine, now what we need to do with this fear is we need to test it. Because the only way we're going to get around this fear is by facing it head on. It's the only way I've figured my way around even the fear, let's say, of talking in front of a camera. Only a few episodes ago of this podcast, I used to talk monotone like this, and everything was very serious because I didn't want to be myself, right? And the way that you usually need to test these fears is that it needs to be something where it's under controlled conditions, right? If you had a fear of public speaking, yes, you could go out and speak to all of these people entirely in front of a crowd of hundreds of people, and that might work for you. It might freak your anxiety out. However, it might work, and it might be the best way to kind of face that head on. But other ways you can do it is just starting with just a few people who you know and respect and know that they'll have your best interests at heart. And under these controlled conditions, as far as the fear goes, what will really happen, right? If you have this fear of public speaking or this fear of, let's say, starting your business, or this fear of finally deciding to go mountain biking or finally start running, and what is really going to happen? Most of the time, it's not going to be as bad as your mind makes it out to be because again, remember, fear is a feeling, and we get all these anxious feelings, and then we start to think from those feelings about all these bad things that could happen. But you don't actually know if you don't try it, right? You actually have to go out and try these things, and that's the only way to sort of free yourself from some of the fears that you might have. But the best thing that I would say to kind of conclude this is that you can set big, lofty goals, and you can go out and attempt them on kind of a micro scale and then work your way up to actually going after those lofty goals. Because the worst thing that's going to happen with some of these fears of doing something new or wanting to try something that you've always wanted to try is that you'll always wonder if you could have done more. If you could have actually gone out and done that thing, how would your life have been different? And that's my biggest fear, is sitting in a rocking chair, probably somewhere in Scotland, just thinking about all the things that I didn't do because I was too scared to. And that would not be a good feeling. I've worked at different places of retirement homes and been around older people a lot of the time, and sometimes that's one of their biggest regrets, is just not doing some of these things that they were scared of, and that they will never know what it was actually like to do that thing. Pretty scary. I totally agree. But just remember, fear, it's a feeling, but your thoughts dictate your feelings. We need to go out and try some of these. We need to experiment, because based off that past experience, it's a biased feeling about that specific thing. It's not a very scary, dangerous thing in itself by nature. It's just how you perceive it. So go out, try these new things, let me know how they go. And if you have any questions or want me to talk about any specific fears or feelings that might get in the way of you specifically reaching your goals, feel free to message me at the Coach So You Know, and I'll make sure to get back to you as quick as I can. But for now, take chances, make mistakes, and don't be scared that often, because you never know what you might miss. Talk to you soon.